Alright, in the last session, I was doing the wingtip, and I told you that I was going to go ahead and do the landing gear mounts before I went any farther, just to make sure I could do it, because I do want the gear in the wing, even though they don't land all that great on grass, but we're going to do it just like the Continental. And I had told you that I left out the plywood braces and the provisions for landing gear mounts. So I'm showing this because you could do this to a wing that you already have built if you decided you wanted to do a wing mounted gear in a completed build already. What I did was I cut out some ribs out of plywood. This is R5 and R6. I'll show you as soon as I get them out of there and how we're going to fix this. This goes down. So basically what I got here is plywood ribs. And what I did to mark out the landing gear is I cut some plywood squares for the landing gear mounts, and I held them up there where I thought that I wanted them, and to make sure they were parallel to the trailing edge, I put a straight edge across it and measured up from the trailing edge. That way the track will be right. I know I should have thought about this before I did anything, but I didn't. So now what I'm going to do is I marked them out. I'm going to cut out where the landing gear blocks are going to go. There again, relatively straightforward procedure. But I did say that I'd show everything in its entirety. We don't have a whole lot in this airplane. Once this wing is built, fuselage will go real fast. And then we're done. End of the month, we'll have it all framed up, ready to start finishing. I do have some other projects that I have to work on off camera, but so we've taken the piece out of there. Now we have a hole in the sheeting, but there's no way to set the gear down in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the plywood ribs back in, mark them, and cut the notches. Then I have to make up the landing gear plate itself, which is not a big deal. So we got 5 and 6. This is 6, and that goes down. And 5. I don't want to cut the rib out yet until I have the plywood cut. Tight fit, so little piece of balsa there wouldn't allow it to go in there. So now I just take this. Now we'll do it this way. We mark where this goes on the plywood. We're going to have to take that out, cut it on the bandsaw for a notch. I gotta stop a minute, I hear an alarm. Well, it wasn't mine, so that's a good thing. Anyway, you take the plywood floor. I'll give you a list of materials here in a minute. Plywood floor. And we're gonna draw it out. You don't want to go halfway up because on the inboard side the lead outs are going to have to pass there, and they're going to pass about midpoint. So I'm going to go ahead, R5. I'm going to go ahead and cut the camera, cut this out. Then we'll cut the rib, make sure this all fits. So this is outboard. Put an O on it. So I'll be back in a minute. So basically we have a piece that looks like this when we're finished. And that gets epoxied in onto the rib. And the reason why I'm showing this is, yeah, it was a mistake in the original layout. But let's say that you have an airplane that you would like to switch over from fuse gear to landing, to wing gear. You could tear back the covering in a bay or so, and do this without a problem. So now we put this in here. And it fits very tight, like I said. And then this one. And what's going to give it extra strength is I'm going to put a 3/16 balsa bulkhead right on top of it. And it'll all be epoxy together. So it should be real strong. We're just going to dry fit everything, and then I'll glue everything. So now I take the X-Acto knife, and I cut down to the plywood. Would have been a lot simpler if I'd done it the correct way, but I had to think about this fix for a day or so to figure out how I wanted to do it. And I believe this will work as good as any. I'm not left-handed, but the angle of this, I have to use my left hand. Okay. sure that's flush with the plywood. The box we're going to build goes right down in on top of this to hold it down, so that'll give it some more strength. I've got to cut back some of this. Before I glue this, I'll get the camera in hand and give you a bird's eye view of how I did this. I want it to fit tight, but I got to be able to get it in there. So, that's the okay, that's going to fit good once I get the fingernail file and straighten that up. Yes, indeedy, that'll work. So, let me get the camera and I'll show you what I've done. Okay, quick camera in hand, then I'll put it back. So what we've done is we've cut those plywood pieces. I've notched out the ribs. I'm going to epoxy these pieces in. I'm going to set up the floor like I normally do. I'll show you how to do that. It's not a big deal. But then we're going to epoxy this in, and I'm going to go around the perimeter with 1/8 inch, sand that in, put the cap on it, sand that to shape. In the back here, it will have a piece of 3/16 standing end grain on there up against the plywood bulkheads, the plywood ribs, and that will give it its real structural rigidity. There'll be a shear web between each one of these ribs up into R1, and these landing gear are kind of far out in the wing. They're between ribs 4 and 5, so mid-wing. But let's get a look at the tip and see how that turned out. This is the bottom. It turned out pretty nice, and the top. We still have the inboard tip to make, and that's gonna be real nice. So I hope you're getting something out of this. You'll notice I told you I had those sanded pretty thick. I didn't thin them quite out, but now they're down to a reasonable 1/8 of an inch, or a little bit more than an 1/8 inch, and because we sanded and shaped the top. So I'm going to cut the camera and get back to gluing those plywood pieces in, and when I get to the making up the mount itself, I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. So I'll be back in a moment.